This afternoon, we're going to talk about franchising and online sales. And so, in the franchise world, in many ways, I feel like everything is dated. The franchisee conversion processes, how franchisors communicate with candidates, and franchise brands are spending thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars to attract franchisee candidates, but they're dropping the ball at the very end. They're not converting them, or they're not achieving the right conversion metrics. And so today, I'm really glad to be joined by Laura Meyer of JoyBrand Creative. Laura is an expert on franchise sales. And most important, Laura's been an entrepreneur, a franchisor. She knows what it's like to build a business. She knows what it's like to be frustrated, not seeing growth. And she knows what it's like to succeed. But most important, Laura's been dedicating herself and JoyBrand Creative to really immersing in the franchise sales world, and I should say more specifically, the online marketing world. So today, what we're going to do, we're going to combine online marketing, franchise sales funnels, and we're going to introduce it to the franchise sales world in a way that I don't think has been done before. So welcome, Laura.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I would even say their consumer marketing. We should talk about their end user marketing as well, because that's something that I have a lot of experience with. And I'm just really excited to be here. I love this stuff. I love all things marketing. And specifically, this type of marketing has been incredibly interesting this year. There's been a huge shift from online to offline, of course, with COVID. And then being on the cutting edge of that and following those trends and having clients in both the info product world as well as in franchising, it's given me just a unique perspective on what's working really well right now that I'm excited to share.
It's a really good point that consumer marketing and franchise sales marketing, franchisee candidates, both are driven by digital, right? And so there's definitely a connection there. And I think when franchise brands understand their digital marketing on the franchise sales end, they should be applying the same principles on their consumer end. So that's all. I think are going to be critical aspects, and everyone who's watching, as you see, as we go through this process, and I took a look at Laura's amazing slides. What you're going to find is there's a ton of strategic planning, there's a ton of discipline, and I think these are steps that franchise brands need to put together. I'd almost guarantee that 99.9% of franchise brands out there are missing these connections. They're missing out on maximizing their dollar spend and their conversions. And so we'll go through that. Laura, just brief background information, just some background on your end.
Yeah, so I have a creative background. That's where I started in the photography space, and my franchise brand was photography related. And then I ended up moving more into a marketing role. And today I'm pretty much a fractional chief marketing officer / business growth consultant to brands that are growing and really looking to make a difference in the world and amplify the amount of people that they are able to positively impact with their brand. I serve on the board of Make-A-Wish Philadelphia. And I have 3 children and live in southeastern Pennsylvania. And for those who are watching, I think the place I can help the most right now is really thinking through what does this online sales process look like for your brand, both for consumer marketing as well as franchise marketing, and where are there basically like profit pockets that you are just leaving money on the table because this infrastructure isn't in place. And I've never met a brand, even brands that have very sophisticated systems and carts and types of CRM technology that is fully optimized. And so let's talk about what that optimization looks like today and how you might be able to take some of the components of your offline marketing, bring them online, or make your online marketing even better.
Just to help frame where we're at.
Yeah.
Franchise brand, or any business really, sales are actually good. We think we're doing a good job. We naturally want to increase our sales. My biggest fear always as a business owner, and for our clients, is you hear the wins, you know the wins you have, you don't necessarily hear or know about the losses, right? So it's that leakage in the bucket.
Yes.
How do you know you're maximizing the dollars you're spending? How do you know you're spending them in the right way? How do you know you're even devoting the right resources? What kills me sometimes too is I'll see a brand that is spending money on trade shows or spending money on all these other attraction mediums,
Yeah.
but then don't have their brand positioning down, don't have the
Yeah.
conversion funnels, don't even, just have an old school way. So you're a franchise brand, you're a business. We're now about to stop leaks in that bucket, improve conversions, and develop a new system in terms of online sales and digital conversions. So we're going to look at the next 60 days. And so lead us into this, Laura.
Yeah. So I would say like most companies, when they're thinking, well, I want to bring in more revenue, they immediately say, well, let's get some more leads in the door. But it's actually the most expensive thing you can do is to try to go out and lead gen. For most companies, they're leaving money on the table with their current process. For most companies, they're not nurturing their lead list, whether it's consumer lead list or franchise lead list, with a powerful enough message that's interesting enough to make people want to act. And I think in this time of 2020, at the time we're recording, it's summer of 2020, and this will probably continue for many years. People will pay attention to painkillers. They're going to pay attention to something that solves an immediate problem. And I always say, sell them what they want, but then give them what they need. And so and this is probably more true on consumer marketing. And so let's say that you are, actually, Charles, give me a concept. Think about a concept that you have and give me maybe a popular franchise concept right now.
Well, I'll give you a difficult one, which
Yeah.
will give you a restaurant space that's doing well,
Yeah.
fast casual barbecue.
Great. Okay, perfect. So every day I homeschool my kids. I work full time. I'm at my computer all day long. And at 5 o'clock, everybody's asking me, what's for dinner? Okay. How are you going to solve that pain point? How are you going to help me at 5 o'clock put something in front of me that makes me so easy for me to be like, sure, done. And I tell you what not to do. Don't give me a million choices. Don't make it hard. Just tell me how you can solve that problem for me today and then upgrade me on the other stuff later. And that is, I would say, one of the big mistakes that brands make, right? Is they try to be like, well, we have this option, we have that option, and you can sign up for this, and do you want this? And in addition to dinner, we can also help make you breakfast. It's like, no, just solve the problem that I need right now, because we are in a world where I need a painkiller, and there's a lot of pain right now. And if you can meet me where I am and speak my language and give me something that's really easy, and by the way, don't forget to remind me, because I'm very forgetful. And because I'm a mom and I'm homeschooling, I'm doing all these things, right? Same thing could be applied to anybody. Everybody needs follow-up. Every avatar needs follow-up. Now, all of a sudden, I'm hooked, right? You've got this solution for me that speaks directly to my pain. And now we can start talking about upsells and increasing lifetime customer value and average cart value. And those are metrics that a lot of companies don't pay attention to because they're so busy trying to get that next customer in the door when they're sitting on opportunity right in front of them. So that's why I like to start with the metric, right? Like, what is that metric that you want to hit? Oh, well, I want to increase sales by 50%. Okay, great. How are we going to do that? Is it average cart value? Is it by increasing, like I said, frequency, lifetime customer value? And let's come up with some systems to build out the back end. I'm always such a big fan of building out the back end of the funnel before you start lead gen. So an example is I was brought into a multinational company last spring, and it was a franchise brand, and immediately they're like, we need more leads. And I was like, well, you sure? Tell me about your email list. So they're sitting on this huge email list, and when I say huge, I mean hundreds of thousands of people who expired. Always like, look at your alumni or look at people who dropped off, and come back to them with a relevant, time-sensitive, deadline-based offer. And instead of going out and, paying $50, $100, maybe $10 a lead, depending on, where you're generating that lead from, now what we're doing is we're putting the current email list into a nurture sequence to an offer that we get to prove out before you start spending money on front-end traffic. So, usually if we think about more revenue, more net income, that is not necessarily more leads. It can be, but rarely again are people fully optimized on the back end.
See, Laura, it's such a big concept, right? And what one of my concerns, and we represent a number of brands, right, is when many times you rely on an outside vendor. And the easiest thing to do is, hey, let's spend dollars on X and let's look at this binary conversion. How many leads did we get? Or how many new franchises are signed? And so your point about setting some goals or KPIs here, and again, reinterpreting and just following your lead here. If you're in franchise sales, maybe your KPIs need to start including prospect engagement,
Yeah.
interaction metrics, because what's happening is, everyone's picking that low hanging fruit.
Yes.
So they called, oh, someone spoke to them, they
Mm.
converted. That we think that's the way it should work. We don't realize all the other people that partially raised their hand but didn't get
Yes.
this good feeling of engagement.
Right.
So right now though, like, and I think during COVID too, I happen to think there's many brands that are sort of zombie brands. They've succeeded because they've succeeded. They have some momentum. They don't realize they may be walking dead and they don't realize it down
Yeah.
the line. And so, I mean, I don't want to get ahead here, but it is part of the solution right now because the brands, right? If I go to the earlier screen and say, what's our goal 6 months? They're going to say more sales, right? But what about our engagement, our purpose, our branding, and all of that that has to come in and be involved in the process. So let's go down that road. So I'm a brand, Laura, and I want more franchise sales. I want more leads. And your point is that's not enough if we're going to evaluate with your KPIs. And then you're telling me I have to be a painkiller and solve a problem. I'm like, we're a franchise and you can make money. And that's I think that's where the discussion ends for many.
Yeah. And what is the lifestyle that you are presenting to a prospect? What's their current pain point when it comes to their lifestyle? That could be one example of how messaging is so important. It's like first knowing your avatar, right? And then understanding what pain they're in, and then messaging and packaging your offer that, again, meets them where they are. It doesn't necessarily sell them on something they don't want. It sells them on something that they're like, oh, thank goodness. This is perfect for me right now. And those are the brands that are doing really, really well. Because I am very involved in online entrepreneurship and info products in that world, in as much as I am involved in traditional business, a lot of people who are in traditional business are like, oh my gosh, things are so bad, they're really hard, we're going into a recession. I can tell you right now that the online entrepreneur world is doing extremely well. People are having record launches. There are record sales going on for a lot of those businesses. Why? Because they're solving a very specific pain point and they're making it easy for people to say yes. And that online world really knows how to message and package offers because it's really competitive. And now everybody's on the online world and traditional businesses getting thrown into the mix. And they're probably like, shoot, like to compete, I've got to do the same thing. And I think the companies that will win will learn how to do that. And I'll say that most traditional businesses, I think, underestimate the assets that they're sitting on. They underestimate, again, their email list. I mean, there's been times I've gone into brands and I'm like, tell me about your email list. And they're like, they're clicking around, they're trying to go into the back end of MailChimp, or I'll say, well, tell me about, the email lists of your franchisees to market to the end consumer. And they're like, I don't know. And I would say that, now more than ever, people are learning that those types of assets are so important to their business. And if you don't have a way to build up a prospect list and nurture that list and not be afraid to go back to that list, you're probably leaving a lot of money on the table. And just because one webinar didn't convert, and by the way, you should always be, measuring the amount of people that show up, the stick rate, how many people stay around for the pitch, right? Like that's really important to determine the quality of that webinar. if everybody falls off after the last 5 minutes, you might want to re-record it. But maybe there's another webinar that would just be a better fit for that audience. It doesn't mean that they weren't interested. They just weren't interested in that webinar topic. So I think it's, again, not being afraid to make multiple offers to the same audience to see what resonates and continue to nurture people over time. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to know how to do.
Laura, as you're speaking, I mean, everything I'm always reflecting on franchising, and it's so true that for 99%, the digital world for franchising is basically viewed a website as a digital brochure and nothing else, right? And I don't see brands investing in their digital platform, their conversion sequences, and even the team members that are capable of doing it. They treat it as, let me just hire an outside vendor who I'm going to get frustrated with down the line. I can only bill them X because they don't want to commit too much. So everyone's taking half measures. There's no immersion in that storytelling and sales funnels, right? So this is about sales funnels. The other thing I like about the digital spectrum that I think brands are missing is you build up renewable assets. They get reused.
Yes.
The efficiency grows as opposed to spending dollars and losing it. And so that's where I think my takeaway so far is I'm a brand, and in 60 days, sure, I have different goals. I want to sell, I want to increase leads, but my goal right now in a COVID world where I want to win at franchising is I want to have renewable sales funnels and assets that I could rely on, and that I could view KPIs and see what my engagement is. So as I'm going through this process as a brand, that's where I'm focused on right now, Laura.
It is. And it's a difficult place to get people focused because there's a lot of details, and it's really easy to look at something and be like, really, does adding in that step really make that much difference? And I'm here to tell you it is the difference between it being profitable or not profitable.
Well,
it is 100% the difference.
Well, and I could share, our law firm, naturally we maintain a list of clients and we send out communications. We don't use HubSpot. We use another company. I'd like to use HubSpot. Anytime we engage with HubSpot, they know. I'll get a phone call the same day, right? Because they're tracking whatever emails that were sent. And I would just question for a franchise brand, are you getting reports on engagement? Who's opening your emails, what they're doing with them, and how are they engaging with your videos and your platforms?
Yeah, and ClickFunnels and those types of CRMs are starting to be able, like Kartra is a new platform that's a competitor to ClickFunnels, and they're starting to be able to include that integration. And then Google has a new product called Videolytics that allows you to do that to the degree to which you've integrated it with a software called Zapier. So there's lots, it's going to get more and more popular to be able to track people to that degree. HubSpot was definitely the leader in what's called inbound marketing in that way. But the bottom line is like a upsell, a step is always better than no steps. So if what I just said is like, you're like totally not following, don't worry, because something very basic and simple and what I would call a minimal viable funnel is better than no funnel. So you always make money with a funnel versus not having one. So we can even skip to that sales process map too on this slide, if that's better too. Yeah, so it's just some examples.
Well, yeah, and let's do that because one of my biggest, as we've done a number of webinars and development conferences, and time and again, like the brands that are doing well, have built around the journey of their franchisee candidates, right?
Yes.
Right? And like you say, focus on the pain point. So they're building around the journey. So talk about that, Laura. Okay, so 6 months from now, I want a meaningful journey for those that contact us and engage with us. I want to develop metrics. What does that look like in terms of processes?
Yeah, and I always think that if you have a great end user, consumer, or if you're B2B, a B2B sales process in place, that's just going to help your franchise sales. Because if I'm a franchisee and I come in and I'm like, what do I need to do to get leads? And you're like, well, put up signs and, and go hang out with the PTA. I think, the franchisee is going to be like, how do I know if I'm winning at that? Whereas if you have something like this in place, it's very easy to tell if a franchisee is winning because it's so metrics based. So I would say that as a franchisee, it's going to be easier to sell your concept the tighter you have your marketing infrastructure. And this can apply to either, right? And this would just be in a very simple, I'm sure so many of you have, filled out your email address and opted in to a PDF. And if they click and then they can apply and then you might approve them and then they'll schedule and then they'll call, right? And this is a very simple process. That this is just where you want to start. And then we'll show what a more complicated sales process looks like down the road. I have a slide for that as well. But just getting this mapped out initially of like, what is it that you want this to look like will help you so, so much on figuring out what the steps are.
Well, it's when you map it out, you're forced to actually evaluate what you're communicating.
Yeah.
And there's many brands and businesses that it's an afterthought. And I would even question, they may not even know what the PDF is if they are offering one or what the communications are looking like.
Yeah.
We have that initial engagement. What comes next?
Yeah, it's just follow up. I mean, if I were to say there's many, many steps, and again, I have a map of a more complicated sample, but it's just many, many options to follow up, to buy, that again, so many people give up on the first phone call, right? So this is an example of more complicated sales funnel where it's if this, then that, right? Like sequences of emails that are messaged differently. So many companies are just like, oh yeah, we email our customers with a monthly newsletter. And I'm so sorry to be the one to say this, but nobody wants the monthly newsletter. Nobody's converting off the monthly newsletter. It's not a good way to nurture your prospects.
Laura, for someone listening who's thinking, this is what we need.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm not going to be the one to implement this.
Yeah.
And the answer is always going to be, it's all of the above and it's all these steps, but where do the breakthroughs happen? And let's, because how do we get from where we are today to that breakthrough, right? So we're planning this out. Is it correct for me to, how do I recognize the problem I have? Because most brands think everything's fine anyway. And it's really, they just need to get better leads. They will claim they need to get better leads or more leads. And that's all they're going to claim.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
So how do you get them to the step of recognizing, no, this is really where the issue is?
Yeah, I would say that if your sales team is blaming marketing and marketing's blaming sales, you probably want to work that out before you bring in a consultant because you'll end up just sort of spinning your wheels. But I would say getting everybody in the room, getting the CEO, the leaders in the room, that's really important. There's been times where I've been brought in and the CEO passes me off to somebody. And then I go back to the CEO and I say, listen, this is your biggest money making opportunity, but he wasn't in the conversation or she wasn't in the conversation. So then I'm trying to catch them up. So it's really important that from the get-go, they say, what do we want this process to look like? And I am such a proponent of this is a very complicated system. And actually this could get way more complicated as well, but do things one step at a time because you test and optimize. Like, why build out the back end if your lead magnet's not converting, right? Or you don't like the price that it's converting at. So you want to build this out one step at a time. And it always just, the step that I recommend you start with really just depends on how warm your traffic is. I always want to start this infrastructure build out with the warmest audience you have. So the warmest audience you have might have been prospects within the last 30 to 60 days. Somebody who attended a webinar, tried out your service or product, visited your page but didn't convert, right? Like if they're pixeled. So that is the warmest audience you have, and that's where you want to start because that's where you're going to get the win, the immediate win, that's going to give you encouragement to keep going with the process. And so you want to start with that warm audience and then keep building out your infrastructure as the audience gets colder and colder. Because again, those are more expensive leads. They're harder to capture leads. They're ones that you have to work harder for. And from there, once you just keep building out a step, testing it. The other thing that I'll say is don't burn your whole list at once. So let's say that you have a 100,000 person list. This particular brand that I was working with recently had like 200,000 customers because they were able to access all of their franchisees' leads, and that's why they had such a big list. I'm like, oh my gosh, do not email 200,000 people at the same time, please. Please do not. Let's start with the geography. Let's start with 5,000 people. Let's see if the message, converts. Let's see if the subject heading is sticky. Let's see if people click. Let's continue to make it better, and let's continue to get feedback. And what happened with that one brand is that I generated so many leads, they had to stop with the lead generation and build out an inside sales team. So I'm like, yeah, thank goodness you didn't email 200,000 people at once, because it would have broken your sales process if it works really well, right? Which it did. And it did break their sales process. So I think it's really important that you're willing to test and measure in increments for those reasons. And they were all freaking out. I'm like, these are good problems, like too many leads, good problems. Sales team can't keep up. It's a good thing, but we want to slow it down and make sure you've got the right people, and you're not just throwing, warm bodies into the inside sales team because, because there's a flood, and now you're just kind of throwing good money after bad. So you want to make sure that you've got that, in place before you scale up.
When a brand goes through this process, when a business goes through this process, then they start seeing results. What are some of the biggest insights that they gain, things that they didn't expect to see that they learn about their business?
Yeah, a lot of times what happens is that they'll realize that their offer wasn't as strong as they thought it was, that their teams aren't as strong at converting as they thought they were. What it does is it reveals holes in the system that they didn't know was there. And so some brands are a good fit for starting with a direct response online marketing campaign like this, and some brands aren't ready because they just don't have a strong enough offer in the marketplace to convert. And what you're going to do is you're going to end up overspending, and you're going to end up exerting a lot of effort for something that's just, it doesn't resonate, right? And I can create tons, my team and I can create, high converting copy. We can measure the subject heading until the cows come home. But if it's not a high converting offer, you're just going to end up spinning your wheels. Luckily for this brand, I knew it was a high converting offer because they had metrics in place that showed that it was a really strong offer. It was just under marketed. And that's when you start seeing these like incredible successes. But when the offer just kind of falls flat, or it hasn't, or somebody's saying, I know we're in economic uncertainty, but here's our $2,000 package. It's not broken down into smaller steps. There's no payment plan. That's a good example of like, you can market that, but you're not meeting people where they are right now, which is that they want to spend a little bit of money to try something out before they spend a lot of money. And that's just a good example of what I see working really well in the online space right now.
Laura, what struck a chord is when you refer to brands, right, spending money that they're not going to get good ROI, they're not ready. You'd mentioned that they don't have a good offer, right? There must be different segments. I mean, because there's brands, if someone who's going to be listening to this webinar, they could maybe have the best offer in the world, but they may not have the credibility, the voice, the brand positioning. So, I mean, are there stages where you first have to align your brand and then you have to align your sequences and your funnels, or is this something you do all together?
Good question. I think it depends on the price point. I think higher ticket offers need more brand awareness to convert first. So for example, like a franchise sale probably, needs some increased brand awareness. And there's things you can do in the front end of your funnel to build trust and credibility. But for our consumer marketing, which is really where I spend most of my time, or B2B, but like in the entrepreneurship space where you're selling to small businesses, if you have a really good offer and it is well explained and you have strong creative that's designed to convert, you can bring people from cold to close pretty fast. And so it guess, again, it just kind of depends. It depends on the, whatever it's high ticket or low ticket, or if it's an entry price point, or if it's what I would call a self-liquidating offer, meaning that you've got something small that pays for the lead generation on the front end, and then you've got lots of upsells on the back end. So again, it depends on the product or service.
Well, but and then that, if I tie it back to franchise sales, franchisee candidates always have a question of how do I market, right? You brought up the example of, hey, it's not just good enough to put out a sign and go to PTA meetings, right? So I think they're, franchisees, they buy based on validation, right? Based on purpose, right? And most importantly, based on unit economics, right? So they do want to know, hey, when I come into the system, what is that engine that's going to turn on in terms of lead generation, conversions? And that in turn, if that's something you're talking about in the franchise sales process, that's a big factor. It's a big differentiator.
Totally. So let's take an example of a book funnel. Just a classic book funnel. They've been around for years. I went through the, Frank Kern Consulting certification. He built his practice on book funnels. And oh yes, so this is like where the money starts. This is where most people stop, as they send an email, and that's it. And there's all this infrastructure that is possible beyond that. But for example, a high converting book funnel could be a great asset for you to prove out and then provide to franchisees so that they can use in their local markets to be able to get leads in the door. It takes some patience, and it takes some practice, and it takes some really important consideration when it comes to the messaging and packaging of a book and book funnel and audience targeting to get right. Once you get it right, that would be great for franchisees to be able to use.
Talk about core processes. You're giving examples: product launch, book funnel, seminar pitch, webinar, right? So it all works together holistically, I think, right? And so if you're mapping all of this out, you're mapping out that customer journey. What I love about going through this process and having that is all of these assets could be deployed at multiple levels, whether it's on websites, whether it's in funnels, and where for a brand that isn't advanced on the digital space, has a great product or service, or is franchise sales. Well, actually, let me rephrase it this way, because you have really good experience in the franchise world. If you're speaking to a startup franchise brand or an emerging brand, had a good year last year, and they're up to now, say, 35, 40 franchise units, where would you be focusing them in terms of their franchise sales process, their funnels? What would be some best practice recommendations you'd have for them?
You mean to sell franchises versus their end?
Actually 2 parts, Laura. I'm going to go first on franchise sales, and then second on supporting their franchisee sales.
See, I'm a big fan of believing that if you have a great unit level economics, you know where I'm going with this. Why you're smiling?
Well, I'll tell you why. And anyone listening, I love this point you're making, because Laura and I worked with a client together, and I actually, and I've done this, we've had this conversation before. I've always stated that there should be 2 different processes, one for franchise sales and one for consumer. However, and the client brought up your point, I agree with what you're saying. You've convinced me. And I now know I've confused everyone listening to the webinar, but I think it's really important. What we're talking about now is, should there be a different franchise sales process per se for franchise sales versus sales, consumer sales? And what's your point here, Laura?
My point is that what sells franchises? A great system, unit level economics. That's when it stops becoming a hard sell. And that's when people are kind of like, my friend said that she's doing X amount with that brand. Like, can I get on that? Because that seems really fun and she's making good money, right? Like that's the conversation that you want to be happening between cousins, sorority sisters, brothers, right? So that's what you want to happen. And so I'm always a big fan of like build out the consumer infrastructure, create a ton of value there. And then your franchise it'll become more of a pull strategy than a push strategy, which is what most franchise sales is. And I think that's where I like to start is I like to start with, okay, well, what is it that you're selling and how is that positioned and how are you unique or special? And if you have a great core marketing process, that's a wonderful conversation to have with a franchisee. So I would say that building out your consumer marketing system. And what you were talking about is that when there is a process built on a process, it's what we call, us internet marketing geeks call a super system. And basically they exit one, so they opt out. They say, no, despite all of your offers, I don't really want anything to do with that product line. And then you go at it with a different angle and you put them into a whole nother sales process and they may convert off of that. And when you have good enough technology in the background, it all just runs. And so it's like, oh, you don't like this, you don't like mushroom soup, try this. And that's kind of what you want to make sure that you've always got running. And so once you have that in place, once you have a super system in place for a franchisee, the question that somebody is always going to be asking themselves, because I live in the online space too, right, is why wouldn't I build this out myself? Why wouldn't I, Charles, just open a restaurant with a menu similar to this? And why wouldn't I just do it myself? Because you know what? So-and-so is selling a $2,000 course on how to create a restaurant menu. I could just buy their $2,000 course. Why should I sign up for your franchise system? And the answer is because we're going to shortcut you, right? We've got all of these things in place and we have a brand, but for an emerging brand, it's like, okay, you might have brand equity in a certain geography, but if you can shortcut me for a year or 2 years because you've built out this infrastructure, you've thought of all these things, you've tested it for me, you've saved me $100,000 of testing, like amazing, right? So I think that's why it's always so important to have that core system in place for on the consumer or the end user side of things, and then build out the same thing for your franchise sales. And you know what your webinar is on, how the core pillars of your end user marketing system. And one thing that I often like to do, which is actually really fun, is I'm like, let me show you how I got you as a lead. People love that. And of course they're bought in because they gave you their information. So it's like, let me show you how I sold to you. Let me show you the ad I ran. Let me show you the metrics on that ad. And people are fascinated. They love seeing the behind the scenes of that. And it's, pretty genuine too.
We're going to highlight this as we edit, but the advice you just gave, I think, is so critical. And I wish I wasn't on the other side of this, meaning my advice as demonstrated by you, and I'm fully converted, is not the right advice when and I think what I've articulated is probably a mistake that many brands make, right? Think about how many emerging brands probably spend more time on their franchise sales marketing than their end user consumer marketing.
Yeah.
And I think what you've said is probably some of the best advice in the franchise industry, which is that is what sells your franchise. And that's where you're going to achieve your unit economics. That's where the magic is going to happen. When you could magnetize that franchisee marketing, turn on a system, turn on sequences, and then actually deploy that across your whole system and generate those economies of scale, that's where you're going to win and build sustaining wins. And I think that's right on point. And look, there's a genuineness component to it. Right. If as a franchisor, my primary obligation is to honor your commitment to the brand and do everything I can to make you succeed, there's no better way to demonstrate that than my consumer processes. And it's sad because not because they're bad people, but because they're not given honest advice. There's a lot of startup franchisors who aren't told that, hey, maybe we should take a step backward right now, pause for the moment, really lock down our consumer marketing and make sure we could deploy it, as opposed to just saying, hey, you need to spend on local marketing. However you do it, right?
Yeah. I'm very careful about who I take on because I like to win at my work. I'm sure everybody who's listening is like that. And there's times where, a brand will I'll start talking to them and I'll realize they're trying to sell franchises when they don't have a strong enough core system in place yet. And it's not a fit for me, because I think it's really, really important that you are going to, if you're having a hard time with unit level economics, it's important to pause and
Yeah.
focus on that for a little while and then go back to franchise sales when you've got that shored up in light of what's happening with COVID. The other thing that I like is that usually people see an ROI with my services. And again, I'm particular. I'll ask a lot of questions and just make sure I can help before I take somebody as a client. But usually they'll see a return on investment in my services within 60 days. Like that one client I told you about, they saw a 9x return on investment with my services within 90 days. And if your company-owned location or your original locations are growing and you can put that money back into the infrastructure and building out that infrastructure, and you can pay for somebody like me to come in and build it out, like it's a no-brainer, right? And then it becomes even easier to do that. So when you think about it that way of like, I'm only going to put more money into reinvesting into my system and making sure that what I have to offer is even better by increasing the margins on my company-owned locations, like that's just a win-win across the board. So that's also why I like to start there.
And you know what, Laura, I've seen it. Frankly, you can't afford not to go through this process, right? And what I love about it is you're it's like mining for gold, right? You've gone this deep and you just got to go this much deeper, and it's completely there. And now and you're taking assets that an organization already has and monetizing them.
We are.
And I think that's the key. And I think that's the fertile ground for brands. That's where they're missing opportunity. That's where they're missing the real breakthrough, right? You could be successful, but that's the real breakthrough moment when you have that system working. Laura, and anyone who's listening, we're gonna, Laura's been very kind enough to speak with our brands and spend some time. So we have all these slides available for you, and most important, some resources for our clients. And if you go to JoyBrand Creative /Internicola, and the link will be up and our team will be promoting it. Laura's been kind enough to spend some time with our clients and anyone who watches our webinars. And I could tell you firsthand, one of the clients we are working with, very methodical, super amazing people, and I think are really innovating in a strong way. And they've been working with you, Laura, and I have to say I've been blown away. They've actually, I've seen them say we're going to pause on certain things, which I thought is great. And you've really, I mean, just super intelligent people, but you've shifted their focus. And for anyone who's about to franchise their business or an existing franchise brand, I challenge you that success 5 years from now or 4, you track that pathway backwards, it's going to be moments like this. And Laura, so I appreciate you spending time with our clients in that opportunity. Any final thoughts as we wrap up, Laura?
Yeah, I have 3 free process
Please.
maps. Yeah, right here on this link, there are 3 process maps I've actually used with clients. They're real ones I've designed, so you can download them and bring them to your marketing team and say, like, could we do something like this? And if it's helpful to you, like, I'm so happy. I love being generous with what I know. And then if you think I'm a good fit for what you're looking for, there's just a form underneath that you can fill out and we can chat. And I'm always, again, incredibly honest if I think I can help you or not, or if I think there's somebody else that would be a better fit for helping you and it's outside of my expertise, or it's something that I just don't do. For example, if you need a website, I don't build out websites, so I can refer that out. I'm really a consultant. I'm a business consultant and profitability consultant to help you grow your business. So that's just something that I can be generous with, and I'm always happy to get on the phone with people and bounce around ideas and see what I can do. But ultimately, the biggest thing I would say is, I agree that, really thinking about your online sales system is going to be one of the keys to surviving. Not only surviving, but thriving and excelling in the next few years. Because again, I not only see what's happening in traditional business, but I see what's happening in the online marketing space. and it's very advanced. It's becoming very advanced. And what you're going to find is you're not going to be competing against other brands. You're going to be competing against somebody going to a ClickFunnels convention and getting all their information there and starting their business that way. That's where you're going to be competing with in 5 years. And you need to be thinking that way, because there's going to be people who are going to be coming to you, whether they say it or not. That's what they're thinking in the back of their mind. Well, why wouldn't I just take a $2,000 course and learn this? So you need to be way ahead and needing to be able to explain your value beyond the founder did really well with this concept in the territory where they've been living for 10 years. That's where you need to kind of be able to move past.
Laura, I appreciate it. And hopefully, well, I know we'll be doing many more of these. But anyone who's listening, personally, I could not recommend Laura enough. I would definitely download the funnels or the processes. And any questions, always feel free to reach out to our firm. Laura, thank you so much.
Thank you.